Good morning. Happy Memorial Day weekend. Obviously, we just want to say thank you to the families who have lost loved ones, to those individuals that gave their life for the freedoms that we so often take advantage of. I hope you pause this weekend and just say a prayer of thanks for those particular lives. I want to tell you something about this coming up Sunday, a week from today. We'll have a guest with us, actually a guest worship leader. And I'll give you his first name. His first name is Paul. He and his wife and 2 children will be here with us. And yes, we will be interviewing him even more than we've already done this coming up weekend for the worship minister position here at the Cove. So plan on being here and have an opportunity to meet him and his family. I think he will be a blessing to you for sure. We are in an intimate living series. We're kind of at a milestone today. We've been talking about roadblocks and building blocks, mainly about the building blocks that we can place into our lives regarding emotional intimacy. That's where we've been over the last several weeks. We've talked about attentiveness and authenticity, commitment, consideration, desire, encouragement, harmony, interdependence, honesty, respect, and trust. All those individual characteristic traits that we can implement, that we can give attention to, that will help us to build intimacy with God, but also with each other. Well, today we make a shift. For this week and next week, we're talking about physical intimacy. And physical intimacy comes from the harmonization resulting from presence or shared affection. Now, sexual intimacy certainly falls into this arena, but because there are a plethora of great resources out there to advance our understanding and of what God's plan is regarding sexual intimacy, as well as the fact that God designed that for our marital spouse by His design. I know it's not popular in our culture to say that sex is meant and is geared for marriage, but that's the way God designed it. And because that involves one other person, supposed to be one other person, we are kind of in this series going after more than just one person outside of our relationship with God. He is the ultimate person that we're talking about. But we're talking about affection today as well as companionship next week, because those affect the most people. I know I wasn't the best of huggers. It's not that I would wig out. I mean, I'm not uncomfortable giving affection. I'm not a closet Howie Mandel with gripping fear if somebody touches me, or, that I'm going to get something if I touch someone else. I just, when I hugged, I just didn't have a tendency to stick around too long. Well, once when my mouth was more active than my brain, I asked an older church member who is also a longtime family friend who gave a better hug, me or one of the other ministers, and I named the minister by name. Oh my goodness, sometimes my jovial spirit gets the best of me, and this was one of those times. As soon as the words left my mouth, I wanted just to slink back into my office, close the door, put my hands on the desk. I mean, I was so embarrassed. The church member, she was very gracious amidst my immaturity and my awkwardness. Her indirect answer provided more protection from my foolish question, but it also revealed, at least as far as I could surmise from her assessment, my hugs needed a little work. And despite never knowing about this experience, our 2 daughters, Kaylin and Emily, have since taught me how to give better hugs. What does a really good hug look like? Well, it's not really so much a look as it is a feeling, and it's quite simple. A great hug is one that doesn't release until the other person releases. Now, this could produce a little uncomfortable moment if both people have a competitive streak to the point where neither one is going to release until the other person does. But because my daughters have a tendency to hold hugs longer than me, and I had a desire to master the hug, I have to consciously hold the hug until one of them lets go. And sometimes I'm very aware of this, and at other times they remind me by them holding on while my arms start to drop. And it's then I grab them back and I pull them in close. And just for fun, sometimes when they drop their arms, I grab them anyway and pull them close, and I'm like, no, not yet, I want some more. but inevitably we laugh and we have a good time with that. Daughters and granddaughters give great hugs. Grandsons will too very soon. How are you at providing affection? Is it something that makes you comfortable, or are you uncomfortable by it? Now, I know we live in a world where it's become more and more difficult to give genuine affection to others without raising suspicion, without raising doubt, or even incurring criticisms. But that aside, do you feel comfortable giving authentic love through appropriate affection to others, or do you have a tendency to remain hesitant and withdrawn? In our intimate relationships, that affection should come relatively easy or easier than our other relationships. But let's reverse the question for a second. How are you at receiving affection? When all the family gets together, is it natural for you to receive the tenderness and the warmth from your relatives, or do you avoid your aunt and uncle because they're slobber love all over you and you're just uncomfortable with it? Well, when you were a kid, I bet you were able to discern who had unconditional love for you and those that had conditions on their love. Not much has changed in adulthood, has it? So why all this talk about affection, appropriate touch, unconditional love? Because the power of the human touch can make the difference between loneliness and intimacy, between despair and hope, and between apathy and love. Jesus' interaction with a leper in Matthew chapter 8 provides insights into a lot of different things, but it helps us see the power of affection and the power of unconditional love. Let's read this together. When he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. First thing I want you to see is that Jesus is very attentive to worshipers. The language that is used by Matthew, as well as the other two gospel writers, Mark and Luke, who recorded this event, the language speaks that this particular leper took personal action to find where Jesus was and to approach him. So when he came into the presence of the Holy One of God, he knelt in worship. It was a humble posture. It was a reverent posture. His head was bowed to the ground. Get that picture in your mind what that looks like. Well, this garnered the full attention of Jesus because worship always does. The leprous covered man, he proclaimed and called Jesus Lord. Now, how much of the lordship of Christ did this leper understand? After all, it's very early in Jesus' ministry. Does he understand the full Messiah's position of ultimate authority, or was this more a reverent sir? Well, scholars have debated that for centuries. And of course, this man had a limited amount of knowledge, as the Lord of Lords, but that doesn't mean he didn't view him as such. And whether he did or whether he didn't view him as the Lord of Lords, that's not really the main point. He dropped to his knees in worship and he begged Jesus for his affectionate attention. And to me, that kind of answers the question, doesn't it? About how he viewed Jesus. But I wonder what our justification is for not fully worshiping Jesus as this man did. When was the last time we threw ourselves before Jesus in a true posture of humble worship? The issue is not how much did this man know about the true position of Jesus as Lord. The real issue may be with all our superior knowledge of Jesus as Savior and Lord. After all, we've got a Bible, and most of us probably have several Bibles in our home. With our superior knowledge of who Jesus is, what's hindering us from our worship of him? Is our worship worthy of Jesus' attention? What I mean is, are we coming to Jesus singing the same old songs with the same old words, but never listening to the words? Is our worship empty of our spirit, empty of life application? Are our prayers just rote? Or are they just lifeless? Now, I'll confess, I've been guilty of singing songs with full-throated enthusiasm and perfect pitch, all without ever really personalizing the words. I've got other things on my mind. I'm just going through the motions. Well, last October on my writing sabbatical, I started my days in a totally different way than I had previously. I started with worship. That was new for me. So, well, you're a preacher. You're supposed to start your day with worship. Well, okay, but I hadn't, But on this particular month, every day I started with 2 or 3 worship songs. Before my feet hit the floor, I turned on my phone, I put my headphones on, and I just began my day with worship. And I really personalized the words throughout my mind and my heart and my spirit. I was amazed at what some of the words were that we've sung in church. These aren't new songs. These are songs we sing, every month at church. I'm like, those aren't the words. Those can't be the words. I had to Google the words to the songs. I'm like, are these the words to that song? Because I sing that, once a month or so. What was the problem? The problem was I sang the words, but I wasn't personalizing the words. And when we remain unengaged in that kind of worship, that's unengaged with our heart, unengaged with our mind, that's unengaged with our spirit, I'm going to classify myself as offering pathetic worship during those times, if it can actually be called worship. It's not impressive. That kind of worship is not impressive to the one that we're giving it to the one who heals, the one who restores, the one who breaks out of graves. And he's going to break us out of graves too. Now, when I was alone on one particular song, man, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I just lifted up my hands in praise, and my eyes were closed. And listen, I'm not a natural hand raiser. I'm not blocking anybody's view down here, on a Sunday morning. You don't see me going like this or anything. I'm just not a natural hand raiser. So I was fighting myself, and I was the only one there. There was no one else in the house, let alone my room, but I was fighting my own comfort zone. But I had my hands lifted, my eyes were closed. I'm like, you just keep listening to that music, you keep your eyes closed, because if you open your eyes, you're going to need to regain composure and pull this moment. And I just let the moment go until tears started running down my face. Now, my family will tell you I am not a crier, okay? I am not a crier. Putting my dogs down, I've cried, okay? But those are the few moments. But tears just running down my face. I could feel the fight. Tim, you just got to regain composure here, I'm like, there's no one here to impress. There's no one here to be embarrassed. I'm just right here with Jesus, having a moment, expressing my heart, and I needed to express and release the pain that was in my heart. Now, I highly encourage you to find a moment when you can be real like that. Now, it probably is not going to be in the presence of everybody else on Sunday morning. Maybe it is, but probably not. Maybe it's just a private moment so that you can truly worship Jesus in that kind of a way. He's attentive to those who worship him. The second thing I want you to get is this. Jesus hears the plea of the afflicted. Leprosy was awful. It was a living death where the body just slowly decayed. I mean, fingers and toes, they either rubbed off or just fell off. And we don't have a full appreciation for this in our culture or our generation, for the severity of this disease. I mean, maybe the closest thing that we have to the contagious nature of it or the peak of fear surrounding is the contraction maybe of COVID-19, but that doesn't even come close. On the streets, a leper had to yell out the words, "Unclean, unclean," everywhere he journeyed. This provided adequate warning for everyone who was around to clear out. I mean, maybe if we make the COVID-19, unvaccinated, unvaccinated. That was a joke. That was a joke. That would have exacerbated. Think about that for a moment. If you had leprosy and you're walking down the road and you have to yell out those words, unclean, unclean, it would have exacerbated a leper's humiliation. Socially, emotionally, and spiritually. Leprosy was the complete picture of the horror of sin. That's what the picture is. Leprosy is a picture of the horror of sin that has devastated our lives. In first century Israel, where ceremonial purity was required to access the sacrificial system, leprosy threatened your approach to God. If you had leprosy, you were cut off. Jews referred to leprosy as, quote, the finger of God, unquote. It was viewed as a punishment from the finger of God, and it could only be removed from the finger of God. Jewish belief was rather simple. Leprosy, you got it from God, and God was the one who had to remove it. So this leprous man, he clearly announced his belief that if Jesus was willing, he could heal him. He could remove his leprosy. He said, if you will, if you want to, you can do it. That's an amazing confession, is it not? I mean, since leprosy was viewed as, quote, the finger of God, unquote, and only God could remove it, it's this man's view. I mean, at minimal, Jesus is God's representative on earth, but he could have viewed him as God in the flesh, which he was. Now, it's easy in our sophistication, it's easy in our independence to stop recognizing ourselves as being in the same exact condition as that leper. But the fact is, we all are in afflicted flesh. It may not be a leprous package that we have to deal with, but it certainly is a sin package for every single one of us. And just as Jesus heard this leper's plea for mercy, his plea for healing, Jesus will heal and hear our plea for mercy as well, to purify us and to make us clean from our sin, our shame, our guilt, our rebellion, our pride, our hopelessness, our brokenness, our addiction, whatever it is, whatever is hindering us from fulfilling our God-given purpose in his presence to be able to worship him and serve him with a forgiven heart. Jesus expressed unfailing compassion for the afflicted in the first century, and he's still doing it in the 21st century. So what personal malady, what infirmity do you need to bring to Jesus? Maybe it's an immoral lifestyle. I mean, if you're sleeping around with everybody, that's not God's design for you. God has a greater calling to you. Maybe it's a secret sin that you don't want exposed. Maybe it's shame in your work decision. Maybe you're facing financial ruin because you don't save anything, that you spend more than what you take in. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's anger. Whatever it is that you're willing to bring to him, he will give you an attentive and an affectionate ear. He will hear your plea. That's important to understand. Third thing is this. Jesus made a totally unnecessary choice in his healing methodology. This is important to understand. When Jesus stretched out his hand and touched the leper, the earth under every ritualistic, ceremonially purified Jew shook like an earthquake. I mean, if there was a Richter scale there, if one had been available, the magnitude of that shock wave would have sent that needle off that graph paper. I mean, we have a hard time understanding this in our culture. Jesus touched the leper. No God-fearing Jew would have entertained doing that. But Jesus was no average God-fearing Jew, was he? He was the God-flesh Jew. And he decided to touch the leper. The fact is, Jesus didn't need to touch him. I mean, in Luke chapter 17, when Jesus heals the 10 lepers, I mean, he tells them, just go and show yourself to the priest. And while they were on their way, healing was brought to them. And last week, no touch. Last week, we talked about the centurion servant. Jesus wasn't even in the house when he healed. He didn't have to be there. No touch. In Jesus' ministry, he healed from close distances, but also from far away. He worked miracles through words or asking something kind of like seemingly menial to be done, to be healed. And Jesus, instead of healing the man with a gesture or a statement, he reached out and touched the leper's man. No mask, no gloves, no hazmat suit. I mean, that's kind of cool. Jesus chose something that appears totally unnecessary, totally not a part of the healing process to bring healing. Now, the law of Moses was brutal. The law of Moses was vicious. I mean, it dealt with sin, it dealt with suffering in a kind of a vicious way. I mean, this leper had been forced away from his family. This leper had been forced away from his friends. And depending on how long this particular individual, this man, suffered, he probably forgot what a human touch felt like. He probably didn't even remember. It had been so long. But Jesus demonstrated physical intimacy with him and love by touching him. And this lets us know that in our lives, there's going to be times that we are called upon to do some things that may seem unconventional to relieve the suffering of others. Jesus did the unexpected. Jesus' affectionate touch, though, was less about bringing physical healing, and it was more about bringing an emotional return back to humanity. It really wasn't Jesus' touch that brought healing to the leper. When you read all three gospel accounts, it's pretty clear that it was through Jesus' words. So why the touch? Jesus' affection brought something to this man that words never could. How long? How long had it been? How long had it been since the leper shook a man's hand, kissed a family member? How long had it been since he was able to hug his children? Jesus may have only needed the spoken word to bring healing to the man's leprosy, but his affectionate touch actually healed the man's heart. Jesus gave the man an invitation to return back to the human race. Jesus' touch relieved the man in his loneliness. The power of touch can't be overstated. I mean, during COVID-19, when quarantines were happening, isolation, family members couldn't be with other family members and couldn't get together, suicide rates increased, mental illness increased, anger and emotional fatigue greatly increased. We're seeing it in our society even now. Why? It's because God created us as emotional and spiritual and physical beings that require interaction with each other. Intimacy demands it, it requires it. And even experiments in the animal kingdom shows the importance of touch. I mean, many animals will choose comfort over food. Don't test that out on an alligator. You're going to lose. Okay, just saying. So how can we put this into practice in regards to our relationship with Jesus? After all, he's physically not here to give us a hug when we need encouragement, is he? I want you to do this. I want you to take a moment and envision Jesus wrapping his arms around you and giving you a hug. I just want you to see it. See it in your mind and your heart. What does that look like? What does that feel like? Envision Jesus wrapping his arms around you when you're tired, when you're worn out, when you just feel like you can't give anything else. Envision Jesus wrapping his arms around you when you experience a personal victory, like graduating from high school, you know? But envision him giving you a hug when you've experienced the agony of defeat. Envision Jesus wrapping his arms around you when you're afraid and you're filled with fear. When you're in need of comfort, when you're alone, when you're scared. When you're facing uncertainty, when your dreams have imploded, when you have to bury a child that was taken because evil is present in this world. Envision Jesus giving you a hug when nobody else wants to, because you're so bitter and you're so banged up. Envision Jesus giving you a hug and slowly depressing those quills that you've got extended to keep from getting hurt by anybody else. You see, that's powerful. When it comes to other people in your life, why not start by demonstrating a little more affection? How do you do that? Well, try affection in your tone of voice. Stop barking orders and go back to the things that we were taught in kindergarten. I mean, please and thank you go a long way. I mean, demonstrate affection in your actions instead of ordering, your spouse to bring you a piece of pie from the kitchen all the time. Go into the kitchen, grab a piece of pie, and bring your spouse a piece. Look for opportunities to encourage and provide strength to others by putting your hand on a person's shoulder or giving them a hug or a look in your eyes that is warm and welcoming. Try smiling. I mean, it's a universal language. It's free, and it's powerful to express affection to others. Now, I'm not suggesting you have to be hypnotized like Howie Mandel was in the 2015 season of America's Got Talent in order for you to be able to receive and give affection without freaking out. I'm just suggesting you make the choice to open up your life intimately to those that God has in your life. Soften your heart. You don't need fancy words. You don't need a swinging watch to force you into subconscious obedience. You simply need Jesus' example and a willingness to have him be the Lord of your life in that area. What would happen if the church would go to Jesus for affection and we would supply that affection that we receive from Jesus to those around us? What would happen? Well, you know by now what would happen. Intimate living would happen.